Hi, I'm Dave Annell. Welcome to episode 13 of Setting the Record Straight. In this episode, I want to talk about the 19th century censuses of England and Wales, and in particular, I want to focus on the process behind the taking of the censuses. It's important, if we want to understand the records that we use, that we understand how they were compiled. Only then can we start to examine the documents critically and begin to reach intelligent, informed conclusions about what they're actually telling us about our ancestors. I also want to consider why, when it comes to discussing English and Welsh censuses, the use of this particular image should be banned. Before the passing of the groundbreaking legislation that led to the taking of the 1841 census, the UK had already held 4 decennial censuses in 1801, 1811, 1821 and 1831. The aim and scope of these censuses was quite limited. There was no thought of capturing individual names, nor even of recording the heads of households, as had been the practice in the censuses taken in the USA since 1790. These early UK censuses were simply head counts, with a few additional questions being asked, largely to do with occupations. There was relatively little in the way of instruction regarding the methodology to be followed when compiling the returns. The officials responsible for taking the counts were simply advised to proceed together or separately from house to house or otherwise, as they shall judge expedient for the better execution of this act. It was the 1840 Census Act that introduced the idea of recording names, ages and occupations, and it was this act that introduced the new role of enumerator to carry out the task. Initially, the idea had been for the enumerators, who were to be appointed by the local registrars of births and deaths, to visit every house within their district on Thursday the 1st of July 1841, and to take an account in writing of the name, sex, age and occupation of every living person who abode therein on the night of Wednesday the 30th day of June. Following the death of John Rickman in August 1840, the same month in which the 1840 Census Act had been passed, an amendment was rushed through which made a number of changes. Thomas Lister, the recently appointed Registrar General, was now in charge, and he wasted little time in imposing his own ideas on the census. First of all, the date of the census was brought forward from Wednesday the 30th of June to Sunday the 6th of June. All subsequent censuses have been held on Sundays. Secondly, in what might be seen to be a retrograde step, the requirement for exact ages to be recorded was removed, and instead the familiar rounding down of ages to the nearest 5 years was to be employed. But most significantly, realising that the task of collecting all the required information for one district in a single day by going door to door was realistically beyond the abilities of one person, Lister came up with an ingenious alternative. Section 5 of the 1841 Census Amendment Act reads, "And be it enacted that schedules shall be prepared for the purpose of being filled up by the occupiers of dwelling houses." The schedules were to be distributed in the week leading up to the day of the census and collected the following Monday, an excellent way of ensuring that the schedules were all completed on the same day without overburdening the enumerators. We need to understand this. In the 1840 Census Act and in all the subsequent Census Acts, this was the system in operation. The enumerator's job was to deliver and to collect the schedules. The householder's job was to complete them. The 1881 Census Act, Section 4, for example, includes the following clause. Every occupier of any dwelling house or of any distinct story or apartment in any dwelling house, with or for whom any such schedule shall have been left, as aforesaid, shall fill up the said schedule to the best of his or her knowledge and belief, so far as relates to all the persons dwelling in the house, story or apartment occupied by him or her, and shall deliver the schedule so filled up or cause the same to be delivered to the enumerator when required so to do. And this is what was printed on the sheet which accompanied the householder schedule that was used for the 1851 census. To the householder, you are requested to insert the particular specified on the other page respecting all the persons who slept or abode in your house on the night of March the 30th. Goes on to say, this paper will be called for on Monday, March the 31st by the appointed officer, and it will save trouble if, as the Act requires, you have the answers written in the proper columns by that time. When discussing the methodology used to compile the returns, the official report on the 1871 census says that Upon every schedule, it was to be plainly expressed that it is to be filled up by the occupier, and that the enumerator was required to correct or complete imperfect schedules. So it's clear that it was the householder's responsibility to complete the census schedule, and that the enumerator's responsibility was simply to check that the householder had done their job and to remedy any omissions. In 1871, and in 1871 only, an attempt was made to quantify the extent to which enumerator input had been required. On the fourth of the introductory pages in the enumerator summary books, there was a small note at the foot of the page which read, "Of the above schedules, the number filled up by the enumerator himself was..." The data gathered through this exercise doesn't seem to have been considered to be of much value. The 1871 census report doesn't mention the question at all, and it wasn't repeated in later censuses. I suspect there was a degree of confusion as to what was intended. Was it just about the schedules that had been completely filled up by the enumerator, or were they supposed to include those where they'd been required to enter a few details that had been omitted by the householder, or to correct an error or two? It's not hard to find instances where this section has simply been left blank. A quick glance at the data that was recorded in the summary books, however reliable or meaningful it might be, suggests that we're dealing with a very small percentage of the returns anyway, certainly well under 10% and probably closer to 2 or 3%. In 1861, an enumerator who had also worked on the 1851 census wrote to the Times to describe his experiences. He remarked that his work had been made much easier by a great improvement in intelligence in the poorer neighbourhood since 1851. In most families, he wrote, there was, if not a grown-up person, a boy or girl who had had sufficient schooling to enable them to fill up the schedule, and failing this, it was taken to the baker's or the publican's or the chandler's shop or to the rent collector. There was an eager desire manifested to get the return of each family completed before the visit of the enumerator. When it comes to the English and Welsh census returns, the image of the enumerator standing on the doorstep, asking the householder the questions and writing down their responses is a false one, and it leads to people jumping to the wrong conclusions about the details recorded in the census summary books and why there might be errors in them. I have to confess that when I hear people saying that the enumerator must have misheard what their ancestors said, I feel my blood starting to boil a little. Of course, it must have happened occasionally, but it's most definitely the exception rather than the rule, and it's clear that the intention of the census officials was that the schedules should be completed by the householders and that they were there to be ready for the enumerator to collect. Images like this one simply serve to reinforce this false impression of how the census was taken in this country. The image is from the USA. It's an American census taker doing what the American census takers did. This is how the English census enumerator got their information from the householders, and this is the image that you should have embedded in your brain. Thanks for listening. I'll be back soon with a new episode of Setting the Record Straight.